Thank you very much. Good morning. It's good to be introduced as someone that people know. It's like when you go into a pub, isn't it? People don't know who you are. They just recognise that you're always there. Anyway, it's good to be here this morning. I know it's a bit early, but and I will be brief, as many of you know. I'm always brief. So the Internet Governance Forum, I guess most of you have heard of the Internet Governance Forum. Anyone that hasn't heard of it, you might be in the wrong meeting. There's other breakfasts going on. But essentially then the Internet Governance Forum, let's put it in context, because I think our discussion this morning is not only going to look at the Internet Governance Forum, i.e. what takes place at it, what's it for, what's going to come out of it, but is also going to try and place it in the wider ongoing debate on internet governance. And this moment in time, as they say, is quite crucial in the future of internet governance, and it's very good that our Brazilian colleague is here, because Brazil has taken a very constructive and important lead in this debate, as we'll no doubt discuss later. So essentially, let's go back to 2003 and 2005, and many of us were around then debating telecoms or internet or whatever. I was in the UK government then, and people talked about ICANN, and I didn't know what ICANN was then anyway, and talked about internet governance. It sounded very boring. I was quite interested in telecoms, actually. It was much more interesting. But in 2003 and 2005, we had these world summits on the information society, and this was essentially countries in the ITU, in the UN, coming together to debate the future of internet governance. ICANN had been in operation since 1998. And even back in 2003 and 2005, there was a debate on the future of internet governance. Should the internet be governed essentially by countries, by the ITU or the United Nations, or should it be run in a multi-stakeholder environment as was emerging then? And part of the result of this World Summit on the Information Society in 2005 in Tunis was the so-called Tunis Agenda. And the Tunis Agenda, if you like, spells out the compromise. It said, well, we're here where we're here. The internet is growing. We don't know where it's going to go. It's very important. Sustainability, education, skills, etc., etc. But for now, we think it should be governed on a multi-stakeholder basis, that government should have an important input into this process, but so should other stakeholders. And part of the Tunis Agenda set up the Internet Governance Forum. So the Internet Governance Forum was established in 2006. That was the first Internet Governance Forum, and of course this one is as Sabrina said, is the 8th Internet Governance Forum taking place next week in Indonesia. The Internet Governance Forum is an odd body. I mean, it will only be my second Internet Governance Forum, quite bizarrely, that I'll have attended. And it's a mixture of course, a whole range of different stakeholders. And I'm not saying that the internet is unique in bringing lots of different stakeholders together, but it's certainly a very interesting experiment where you've got parliamentarians, which is interesting in itself, that you have not only the executive, but you have the legislative as well attending these meetings. You've got civil society, you've got stakeholders, you've got business, the technical community. A whole range of different actors comes together at the Internet Governance Forum. And essentially, the member states that negotiated the Tunis Agenda that I mentioned, that came out in 2005, saw the Internet Governance Forum as a safety valve, essentially, as a way of, if you like, allowing people to come together to express what they thought about various issues on internet governance, whether it be child protection, whether it be security, whether it be privacy, whether it be how the domain name system was operated. It was a way that everyone could get together. The Internet Governance Forum, the mandate for it was renewed 3 or 4 years ago by the United Nations, and so the mandate for the IGF goes on until 2015. It has to be renewed, if it's going to be renewed, in 2015. And many are seeing this particular meeting in Bali as a test point for internet governance, and no doubt we'll come on to that. Wait a minute. So that's some background, if you like. So what's going to happen next week in Bali? Well, as Sabine said, I mean, Bali at one point didn't look like it was going to happen at all. The Internet Governance Forums are quite odd, really, in the sense that the host country, decides to host an Internet Governance Forum and then has to sort of raise quite a lot of money to host it, because the host country has to pay the United Nations quite a lot of money to put the whole effort into gear. And it looked like at one point that Indonesia couldn't raise this money, and then the technical community and business and other actors stepped in, if you like, and of course it's now going to go ahead. And it is indeed has got this broad overarching theme, as has been talked about, and I think the theme is very interesting in that building bridges, I think, is something that's going to dominate the proceedings, because this Internet Governance Forum is being held in the backdrop of an intense discussion on the future of internet governance. Now, there's sort of three things going on that I'll very briefly mention. No doubt we'll pick up them later. I mean, some of you will have heard of surveillance and Snowden. I know it hasn't really caught the news at all, has it? And it's not, it's something the European Parliament has completely ignored. I don't understand why, but even without that, we'd be standing here today saying this Internet Governance Forum was important. And it's important in two senses. We've got two vehicles, if you like, going along the track. First of all, there's the review of the World Summit on the Information Society. So essentially we had that Tunis agenda in 2005, but the people that drafted it, and the European Union played a critical role in drafting that Tunis agenda, said that it should be reviewed. The effect of the Tunis agenda, this multi-stakeholder approach for governing the internet, should be reviewed by the UN General Assembly in 2015. And there's various preparations for that review. And of course there's lots of questions. What is the United Nations General Assembly going to say? Is it going to say, well, it was a nice experiment, but we think we ought to take over the internet now? Or they might say, well, it was a nice experiment, but let's continue it and do something else. Or they might say, well, we can't really be bothered. It doesn't sound very exciting at all. So the UN have got to take this decision on what happens, if you like, to the Tunis agenda, including the future of the Internet Governance Forum. That's one track which is important, and there's various conferences going on, etc., to determine that. The other track is the International Telecommunications Union, and the EIF has discussed this before, and Hamid Toure spoke at the EIF last year, or perhaps earlier this year, and was very bold and very straightforward about what the ITU role. The ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, represents 196 countries, and as many of you recall, back in December last year there was this major conference, the WICIT conference, that discussed the role of the ITU in terms of the internet. Nothing was really decided. But in 2014, in Busan, in October, November, is the ITU's plenipotentiary. This is their 4-yearly conference, if you like, or their 4-yearly summit, where all the member states come together, all the members of the ITU, all the countries, all the governments, and can effectively change the agenda of the ITU, can change the constitution, the convention. They could decide it could be a restaurant, or they could decide it should do something else entirely. It could become a travel agency, or it could be, could do something else. It'll be very interesting, actually, for the ITU to do something else entirely. It could, run. What could it run? It could. Well, anyway, perhaps we better not speculate what it could do. But essentially, it's like coming together. It's like a company coming together at an annual general meeting and deciding it wanted to do something else. It's fed up with being an energy company. It might as well run the water works or something. So the ITU can decide at this summit next year that it wants to do telecoms and the internet, or it can decide it wants to govern the internet in some way. And that is not the ITU deciding that, it's the membership deciding that. So that's another important point along the agenda. And then finally, and I'll stop here, of course the whole issue of surveillance, the whole issue of the Snowden affair has changed the whole dynamic. It's changed the dynamic for ICANN, who I work for, not because the domain name system, not because the NSA or GCHQ in the the UK are remotely interested. Well, they might be interested, but they don't come along and want to look at domain names. It's the management of domain names isn't content, so we're not involved in the process of that, the surveillance, etc. But the effect of what's happened has changed the dynamic on internet governance, because increasingly governments are saying, well, if we can't trust the United States, if we can't trust the UK, if we can't trust other countries with our information, etc., etc., can we trust the governance of the internet to be governed in the way it is at the moment? So this dynamic is taking place, and this is taking place against the backdrop, as I said, against WSIS and the ITU, but also a feeling in ICANN and in other places that since the December WCIT discussions, there's been a bit of a vacuum for discussing some of these internet governance issues. So there's a whole melting pot going on here, and I'll just finish by citing that in recent weeks we've seen two developments which will no doubt be reflected in the discussions next week in Bali. First of all, there was a so-called Montevideo statement. This was a statement by the technical community, by ICANN, by the regional internet registries that issue the IP numbers, by ISOC, the Internet Society, if you like, the grandfather of all this, and by the IETF, the standards body. There was this statement which talked about the pernicious effects of this debate on surveillance, which talked about the need for governance of the internet to be something that was equal for all countries. A very bold statement. And then just last week, Fadi Jahadi, our chief executive, met with the Brazilian president and declared that, again, this internet governance needed to be discussed at a high level, and Brazil has said that they'll be hosting a summit in April 2014 to discuss internet governance, and that's going to be, of course, interesting as well. I'll stop there, and apologies for taking so long. Thank you.